demonstrated fact. And so depending on the timeline you choose for temperature and CO2, you can say the opposite either way. For example, during the Holocene thermal maximum, after the last glaciation ended, so a period between about 4,000 and 9,000 years ago, a 5,000-year period, it was definitely warmer than it is today. And so you can basically say that for the last 5,000 years, we have been generally in a cooling trend. That is a fact. But you can also say during the last 200 years, we've been in a warming trend, which is also a fact because it goes up and down. And if you go back 20,000 years, we are way in a warming trend because 20,000 years ago, the Ice Age was still at its height. And there were glaciers a mile or more deep all the way through Canada into the United States, down into the Dakotas. There were these glaciers covering the whole of Canada nearly, and all of Siberia, all of Scandinavia were completely covered in a giant sheet of ice. No one wants that to happen again. So that comes to the point I make that not only do we not know that we are actually responsible for the global warming that has occurred in the last 200 years, but we also should think about whether this might not be a good thing, because it would definitely be bad if it got colder in this world.
Absolutely.
The world is already quite cold. And, people who live in warm places don't get that, but come to Canada, which is one of the world's largest land masses, along with Russia, which is twice as big as Canada.
And Europe.
And both of those places are freezing cold through much of the year. When Mexico is producing 3 crops of vegetables and fruits per year with no break in the growing season, here in Canada, there's a 6-month period when nothing will grow because the ground is frozen solid. And that is not necessarily a good thing. So that the idea, number one, that we know that we are the cause of warming, and it's easy to demonstrate that we don't know that we are the cause of warming. All you have to do is ask the question, what caused the ice ages to come on 2.5 million years ago? What caused the various glaciations that have occurred during the Ice Age to come and go 6 times or so during that period? What caused the warming that started in 1800 after the little Ice Age came to an end? It wasn't us. So if you can't answer the question, what was it, then how can you be so certain? And this is what really bothers me and why I love Michael Crichton's quote in State of Fear. He said, "I'm certain there's too much certainty in the world." It is the certitude, the absolute moral certitude of the environmental movement that drives me the most nuts, because they can't possibly be that certain, although they say they are. And I tell audiences it's actually a bit of a weakness as a scientist for me to admit that there's something I don't know, because you seem like you're smarter if you know what the answer is to climate change, for example. If you come on with certitude, Al Gore actually, you'd think he was a scientist or something. He's so certain. But he isn't actually a scientist. He has no scientific training. He is a politician, and a very successful one at that. But he is not a climate scientist. And yet people listen to him as if he is some kind of oracle.
After 22 segments on climate, it was so humbling for me to continue to go into all the different aspects and really look from the place of, I don't know. And it was pretty astounding to me to find out that we're entering a cooling cycle right now. I did an interview with geologist Don Easterbrook and so many others to find out that people don't even get that information, that we're in a cooling period right now. I'm not saying we're in an ice age or that we're a pre-ice age, but we've been in a cooling period around the world. But unless you're tracking it, what's going on, and you just blindly accept what we've been told, then that's what people believe. And I believe that a great portion of the environmental movement and environmentalists and people that love the planet have been hijacked by this. I do want to ask you about nuclear, but I also want to say that it seems to me that whatever energy is going to be consistent with political policy and funding may, in fact, by what you're saying, be unsustainable, because it's based on the lie that CO2 is the boogeyman and that global warming is why, quote, the planet is not working and we're the cause. It's all connected in. There's a lot of things in your book that we have to take time with, but I really want you to talk about nuclear waste. You say it's the fuel of the future. I want you to explain fusion from fission. And in the context of what's happened at Fukushima, I know that people are listening, very concerned, and you can't blame them. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, well, that'll only take about 4 days.
Exactly. I hope you have 4 days.
You're
We may have part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay.
Well, right off the top, say you believe in climate change and you want to reduce fossil fuel emissions, and you're sincere about that. Why would you reject hydroelectric and nuclear power, which are the only two large-scale baseload or continuous, reliable, reasonably priced alternatives to fossil fuels that we have for electricity production at the present time?
Because we're radiologically afraid.
Okay, that's for the nuclear, but why is the environmental movement opposed to hydroelectric power?
Maybe they don't understand it.
Well, it's very simple.
Explain it to us.
You make a lake where there was a river by damming a valley and creating an artificial lake, and then you have what's called a head of water, where the water is now 200 or 300 or 400 feet higher than it used to be, and you use that pressure to run a turbine. It's basically a big kind of propeller-like thing that the water goes through it and turns it, and that runs an electric generator. It's very simple. It's clean, it's renewable, but the environmental movement, including my old friends in Greenpeace, don't like large dams to be built because they say it's destroying the environment. In other words, it's flooding a valley, which is true. But it's not like you're turning the valley into a toxic waste dump. You're turning the valley into a lake. In other words, you're replacing a terrestrial environment with an aquatic one in which fish will be quite comfortable. And then you can go in your boat on the weekend and catch some of them, or go swimming or water skiing, or enjoy the view from the beach. Lakes are nice things. And the environmental movement acts as though it's the death of the planet, to the point where Greenpeace and their friends succeeded in getting the World Bank to pull its funding for the Three Gorges Dam. And in fact, they have stopped about 200 hydroelectric projects. You know what would be the salvation for the Congo, where they're all slaughtering each other with machetes and having tribal warfare and they're poor? That country has all the resources in the world it needs. If they would put some hydro dams on the Congo and generate some electricity, they would be able to build a civilization there, and maybe they would stop slaughtering each other out of desperation and poverty and internecine warfare. So there's the hydro thing. And now there's lots of hydroelectric potential left in the world. In Brazil, where James Cameron goes down to Brazil and paints his face all up and hangs with the disaffected, protesting against a new hydroelectric project in Brazil. How do they want these people to read at night? How do they expect them to get their electricity? Because the only alternatives are nuclear and fossil fuels, if hydroelectric is what you're talking about. Those are the three. And yet the environmental movement basically rejects all fossil fuels, all hydroelectric, and all nuclear, which in fact are about 99% of the entire world's energy supply among the three of them. And so we just have to be a little bit more creative than that. We can't just say ban basically everything. And it ends up that the only electricity technologies that the movement supports and finds morally superior are wind and solar, which are both really expensive and don't work very well. And so, great, we're going to build our civilization based on wind and solar energy so that when the wind stops blowing, you have to send everybody home from the factory because there's no power to make the cars anymore, or whatever it is you're building. And so this crazy dream world that the movement and the promoters of these technologies, who are all receiving vast amounts of subsidies, the only place that solar and wind is viable is where there are government-mandated subsidies or government-mandated requirements for a certain percentage, what you call renewable portfolio standard in the U.S. In Europe, they do it a different way with what's called a feed-in tariff, but they basically force the electrical utilities to build a certain amount of these so-called renewables